All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, Earth on the Brink, a sixth extinction or a breakthrough in biodiversity. My name is Melissa Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy at the Milken Institute. As famed explorer John Muir once said, if we tug on a single thing in nature, we realize that it's connected to the rest of the world. And the most extraordinary feature of life on this planet is its biodiversity. And yet the evidence is showing us overwhelmingly that because of human influence, we're having a devastating impact on that biodiversity. And of course, that's tragic for the many species that will never roam this earth again, but it could threaten the existence of one species in particular, and that is humans. Some scientists say that we could lose 50% of our species in the next 100 years. The Earth has undergone 5 mass extinctions in time. This is obviously the only one that's been caused by humans, and I believe that we have the power to be the problem. We have the power to be the solution. So the best way to orient ourselves to this conversation is to transport ourselves outside of a hotel conference room for a moment and be reminded of the beauty and the wonder and the prosperity that the Earth bestows upon us. So we have a short video clip that we're going to show that was produced by Global Wildlife Conservation, which is an organization that's a friend of the Institute and a leader in science-based preservation. So let's roll the clip.
Our home is the only planet in the universe known to sustain life. Over 2 million species of animals, plants, and microorganisms, crafted over millennia, form the theatres of life that we call ecosystems. From tropical rainforests to coral reefs, grasslands to desert, rivers to mangroves, to ocean. These are the heartbeat, veins and lungs of our planet, the wellspring from which we draw everything, from fresh water to clean air, crop pollination to climate stabilization, artistic inspiration to emotional well-being and happiness. We need the symphony of life not just to survive, but to thrive. And yet, we are wringing this life out of our planet, losing species at a rate unseen since the dinosaurs disappeared 66 million years ago. Forests once alive with the chirps and chuckles of birds and monkeys have in our lifetime fallen silent. Vast plains, once boulevards for rhinos and elephants, lie empty as we pillage majestic animals for body parts. Mountains, stripped of forests, turn rivers once clear as glass into brown sludge. We are depriving our children the chance to experience true wilderness, all in the name of progress.
Now, of course, at the Milken Institute, we care about progress. We want progress. We aim to have global prosperity, but we realize that to have global prosperity, that depends on our real assets. And the Earth is a real asset. We need to have a healthy Earth for prosperity. And if we don't have that, we really don't have anything. But what we do have today is a fantastic panel that's going to help unpack this problem a bit for us and show us a way forward. What can we all do leaving out of this room that's going to change the trajectory that we're on? So I want to introduce to you our panelists. On my far right, we have Paul Bunje, who's the co-founder of Conservation X Labs, which is an organization that harnesses open innovation and entrepreneurship to improve conservation efforts. We have Laura Turner Seydel, who's chair of the Captain Planet Foundation and trustee of the Turner Foundation, and is really living the legacy that your father, Ted Turner, started with conservation. To my immediate left, we have Jill Robinson, who's the founder and CEO of Animals Asia Foundation, and has done some really pioneering work in terms of animal welfare and ending bear farming in Asia, and has lots of great lessons learned to be brought to this conversation. And last but certainly not least, we have Meredith, who has had many senior positions in the technology space, sits on the board of Nature Conservancy, and has spearheaded conservation efforts in Montana, Austin, and elsewhere. So thank you all for being here today. So the big question really that we want to start with is, how bad is it? How bad is this problem? There's lots of contributing factors, factory farming, global warming, illicit animal trade, et cetera. Paul and Laura, let's start with the two of you. How bad is it? What keeps you up at night? And what do people really need to know that we don't fully appreciate?
It's bad, I think, as you saw. Well, and this is a couple of things. You mentioned the sixth mass extinction. I think one of the things that's hard to wrap our heads around is not only the fact that there's a single species responsible, but just how much worse it is than the other 5 mass extinction events as well, right? We're seeing species being lost at several hundred times the natural rate, and at several fold more than in any other mass extinction. In other words, if aliens come down a few million years and they got the alien paleontologists involved, they'd look at this and it would look completely different. It would be an instantaneous mark where everything changed, and that's just not ever been the case before. And what that means is that everything that we are dependent upon as a civilization, as societies, is simultaneously being disrupted. There's no time for evolution to possibly catch up and even maintain any of these minor elements. And I think it's important to remember that this is critical, that we're losing, for moral, ethical, and ecological reasons, that we're losing so many species, but it's also crucial to the survival and prosperity of humans themselves. Remember, our civilization has only existed over the last 10,000 years or so because of a relatively rare warm period in Earth's history, when we were able to start agriculture, settle cities. Literally everything we know about history, everything that is the identity of humanity, is because of this fragile place in a fragile time in geologic history, and we've disrupted that wholesale. In fact, there's some evidence that we have staved off the next ice age, that we literally, through global warming, through climate change, have changed the entire Earth system in such a way that there won't be another ice age. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a good thing, but it also means we fundamentally change things in a way that we don't know how we're going to progress, which is why I think we're at the most interesting in this. I'll pass to you, Laura, but I think it gives us the most interesting time in history because we can be so aware of these changes, so dramatic, where our knowledge set is so deep now about what this is, as are the sets of tools we potentially have to deal with it. We actually have things like technology and an aware public and a need economically to change things, that we can bring those two together. And it's pretty rare that you both know what's going to happen and have the power to change it. But that's where we are now, and I think hopefully we can get into the opportunity that presents.
Yeah, we definitely will. Laura?
Well, in my 56 years, I mean, I grew up in the out of doors, and the worst thing that I could be told was it was time to come inside. And, you know, my siblings and I and our friends played outside. We, you know, became one with nature. We understood it. We got over our fear of nature, snakes and bugs and germs and dirt and the whole bats. I mean, we loved it all. You know, we'd be turning over stones in creeks. And in my lifetime, I've seen our children, you know, they're growing up inside. They're spending 8 to 10 hours in front of a screen a day. They are becoming disconnected from a resource that provides their life support system, our air, our water, our land, our biodiversity. And, you know, it's really bad because there is a disconnect. And even globally, you have NGOs, you know, working to build schools, to educate girls, and, you know, solve the world's biggest problems, you know, abject poverty and food access and health outcomes. But the problem is they're not looking at this long term, because if we're going to survive as a species, we have to all survive together. And my dad, Ted Turner, I know him as Captain Planet. You know him for other reasons, but he's always really tried to bring people and youth to the idea that we need to be good stewards of what God gave us, and it's his creation. And the animals that are here on the planet with us, I've been in Africa, I just got back from Kenya, and there's nothing more healing them being out in nature and then witnessing these magnificent animals that has, they've evolved over hundreds of millions of years. And actually, snakes were here about 180 million years before humans were. They became the symbol of health. And if you ask a room full of people, they're terrified of snakes. And Jane Goodall, who's spoken several times, she's just one of my icons, is trying so hard to save the chimpanzees, and she was interviewed in her current movie, and you've got to see it if you haven't seen it, but that she was never afraid of snakes. Because she had respect for them, and the only way that they would come after you is if you surprised them or stepped on them. And in her film, she's running around the woods in her bare feet, where there are puff adders and cobras and things. So I'm just saying it's important to connect our kids with nature, get them out of the house, get them away from screens, and connect them with what they need to protect, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. And it is really bad, but there are great solutions and a lot of great projects that are happening, and awareness.
Good. Well, we're definitely going to get there. I want to throw to Tom to jump in on this. What is surprising to you about some of the drivers of this and the extent of the problem?
Well, first of all, the comment "it's bad" is one that resounds, I think, throughout the world on many levels. Unfortunately, not at all levels. But then again, I am a believer through science that nature is very resilient. And to the point that Laura just made, there are great opportunities ahead if we choose to accept the challenges. So I'm optimistic that we will awaken collectively as a human society, globally. On the other hand, it is at a point in time where we each day move closer and closer to potentially a tipping point. And I'm not suggesting it's imminent, but one doesn't know. We just don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's, some of the, as I've started to dig into this and learn more, I think it is a scary situation if we think about factory farming and the influence that has. So we have 1.5 billion cows on the planet. They produce 40% of our methane. It's 20 times more impactful on global warming than even carbon dioxide. The warming of the ocean is killing our phytoplankton. We're losing our oxygen. There's lots of reasons why we could get scared into doing nothing and feeling defeated. But we don't want to do that, right? We want to underscore the severity of the problem. It's important, but we want to figure out how do we move forward. So I want to stay on this theme of engagement and how do we get people to be aware? How do we get people to care? How do we get people to act? So Jill, I'm going to turn to you for a few lessons learned as you've done your work with Animals Asia Foundation, which sort of started because of a conservation effort gone bad, is my understanding. But you've been able to be successful in ending bear farming there, and I think there's some lessons learned around how do you get people to care about the problem, how do you drive down demand, particularly as we're thinking about some species that are being hunted, poached for reasons of unproven medicinal purposes. So what lessons learned do you?
Goodness, so many, I don't know where to start, but I do want to say that, I was very touched by what Laura has just said, because, it is down to the fact, I think that it's a crying shame that, scientists actually don't even know how many species there are on this planet, but what they do know is that it's not just the endangered species whose numbers are reducing, but it's almost every other species on this planet at this moment whose numbers are reducing. And you were talking about snakes, Laura, but actually, sharks as well. How many people are fearful of sharks? They have survived 4 mass extinctions, and still they're being hunted to the extent of about 100 million every single year. And I find that just absolutely heartbreaking, in terms of our sheer gluttony and how we're treating this environment. So, I work on the front line, of course, in China and Vietnam, where over 12,000 bears are farmed in tiny wire cages. They're surgically mutilated. We call them our broken bears when we rescued them. We've rescued over 600 bears now into our sanctuaries. And you actually don't know where to start, where they're just so physically and psychologically broken. And it's no use being in a country and pointing your finger at people and saying you shouldn't be eating dogs, you shouldn't be farming bears. You know, we should provide the mechanisms so that you bring the government and the local community and the media and celebrities and everybody else in the community to be as one with your mission, so that it becomes their program rather than your program speaking from the outside in. You need to work from the inside out in these countries, and that's the biggest lesson I think that we've learned at Animals Asia, where to the extent, as you said, Melissa, that bear bar farming is done in Vietnam. You know, I've been there since the 90s. My first foray onto a bear bar farm was in 1993 in China, and it just changed everything about my life. And you know, today I'm just so gratified that the Vietnamese government are sincere in wanting to end bear bar farming, to the extent they asked us to join them in a press conference last July to make the announcement publicly to the world that to work to, you know, mop up the last 900 bears on biofarms. And you know, we're still working in China. Obviously, it's a bigger issue, but there's a lot of support.
Yeah. Well, so I want to pick up on your theme of you bringing everyone around your mission, and I think one of the lessons learned you've had, Laura, is working across macro level, micro level projects. This is the importance of collaboration and breaking down the silos. Can you share some of the lessons learned based on your work?
So through the Turner Foundation, you know, what we need to get to more and more is collective impact, and not working in silos, not having one organization go off on a tangent and saying that they know how to fix things. Because a lot of it is reinvention of the wheel, a lot of capital has been wasted, a lot of communities end up with no benefit. But the Turner Foundation is part of a biodiversity funders group, which is made up of 77 foundations, Packard Foundation, Hewlett, Doris Duke, Walton Foundation, and collectively, you know, funders can drive how NGOs and nonprofits work. So they're not chasing money and bad ideas or trying to reinvent the wheel. And I'm just, you know, proud to be part of that. I just spoke also at the Giants Club in I have to think about where I was. So I was in Kenya. No, Botswana. I was in Kenya. Before that, I was in Botswana. And it's the countries that are working to protect elephants and deal with human wildlife conflict. And one of the speakers from China was saying, you know, they have banned the import of any ivory, 100% banned. And the value per kilo dropped from $2,100 a kilo to like $790 a kilo. So 100% bans on the trade of animal parts is absolutely necessary. And like our government now has backstepped on the importation of animal parts, you know, rhino trophies and elephant trophies. And it just causes confusion in the marketplace. So that is another thing. So, you know, we just have to come out and ban these things outright. And then third of all, you know, we have been working on our own properties. You know, we have 2 million acres in 5 states where we have rewilded 2 million acres using bison that the indigenous people depended on, every body part. There was nothing wasted. And then they were driven to near extinction because the government had open season and killed about 50 million of the bison. And so my dad knew about that when he was 5 years old, and in the back of his mind there was like this empathy and compassion. And when he had the opportunity to go out to Big Sky Country, and he's like, this is the place that I need to be. He used bison to restore the land. And basically it is a functioning Garden of Eden. The cowboys turned into bison men, and they put up all these barbed wire fences and then took them all out. And they roam free, they aerate the soil, they bring that back to native grasses, so you have more pollinators, you have more small mammals, of course the big mammals, the wolves, the bears, the whole ecosystem, the badgers, they all come back. And then what nature has not been able to fix on its own, we've kind of made that part of our philanthropy through an endangered species fund, and we give those endangered species a leg up. So from wolves to falcons to frogs to butterflies to cutthroat trout to bighorn desert sheep, and it's really rewilding is super important, and we've been doing it over 30 years. And
So, Tom, I'm going to ask you to jump in because you've done some rewilding yourself. So what are some of your lessons learned, either from things that have worked or things that you've seen that haven't worked, but should be guiding principles that we use to inform our solutions going forward?
Well, for the people in the room, since Laura mentioned wolves, there's about a 4-minute video clip where wolves were reintroduced into the Yellowstone National Park many years ago. And within 4 years, the flow of the Yellowstone River had changed. And why would that happen? Because without the wolves, the deer and the elk would come down into the riverbeds and essentially stamp down the dirt, change the flow of the river. The predators were gone. Well, with the wolves back, they back off, trees come back, and all those wonderful aspects of nature's resilience are on evidence, literally in a 4-minute clip. If you watch it, you have to be made aware that nature really is resilient. We just have to be sensitive to it. Now, what did that cause when the wolves were reintroduced? The cattle ranchers basically went ballistic because they had to make their living off of free-ranging cattle, which is a good thing on so many levels, as opposed to factory farming cattle, which is a really bad thing. And then there's this conflict, human conflict, over what to do about that issue. And it's not an easy issue at all. I would say that I learned a lot in terms of a group of individuals and myself dedicated conservancy easements along a 15-mile stretch of the Blackfoot River. It's one of the 14 blue ribbon fisheries in Montana. And the fish are back now because we backed off essentially having cattle come up to every part of the river. They come into feeding lanes, if you will. And that too has had a pretty dramatic effect. And what we have done is protect a wide open space that really does matter.
And we have some of those wolves at the Flying D Ranch in Montana. By the way, they made it from Yellowstone, and it's magnificent.
It is magnificent.
And to hear them howl, if Dad were here, he would lead a wolf howl, but he's not.
Do you want to try to step in,
well,
Laura?
we'll wait. If we have time, maybe we'll have a couple of animal calls.
Your son's here, he can do it.
He definitely could lead it. But it's like a symphony of wolves. It's a magical thing. And Tom, you paid witness to that.
So Paul, jump in here, because one of the things that struck me when we chatted was that, we need to be thinking about how do we work with nature, right? It's not things that we do to nature. What have you learned, kind of looking at a body of work about what's worked and what hasn't worked?
I think there's a broader challenge that's represented here, and that is over the last decade or so, we've actually globally increased the number of protected areas by 10 times. Which is incredible. Right? Something like 15% of the world's land area is now in protected status of some sort. Much smaller for the ocean. It's a little over 3% in the ocean. But we have to be honest with ourselves that's not, at least yet, making a real dent. Extinction rates are increasing, actually, in most of the world. And so, as important as these sorts of efforts are, and it's absolutely true, nature doesn't need humans. We need nature, right? It will find a way and make its way back. We have to do this sort of work, but it's clearly either not enough, or it's not enough scale, or it's not rapid enough globally. And I think part of the challenge is that in most of the world, walling off nature really doesn't work. The sort of model that's worked effectively in the United States, where we can have things like national parks or excessive management of our federal lands and things like that enable us to sort of enforce things. In much of the world, this is still individuals and communities that are at a subsistence level that need either the use of forest products or other sorts of things. And coming up with a way to work with nature in a way that everybody now is a part of the solution. Every community is responsible for their own local area and natural area, and it's good for their economy. Remember, if you're not able to feed your kids, and you know what, like, set that aside. That's an obvious one. Even middle class folks, they're going to want to get rich before they want to protect nature. I mean, it's a great thing to protect nature, but it's not something that's scaled up with respect to people's own personal greed. And there's a lot of ways we can capitalize on that, or not even capitalize on it, just recognize that if we can create a natural system wherein people can profit effectively, for example, off of forest products, or maybe engage in forest-based agriculture, like certain coffee plantations exist, or even protecting areas like Gorongosa National Park, wherein there is not only ecotourism, but there's natural product that is valuable to these communities that can help actually generate security associated with them. I think those are the sorts of models that we need to not only identify more, but start to scale up more rapidly.
Yeah. And Jill, I welcome your thoughts on this. And that rings so true. I think from this morning, for those of you who were with Jane Goodall, she said, to save the chimpanzees, we have to save the people. We have to help the people. And I'm sure you have.
Yeah, work from the heart and the head at the same time. But you're right. I mean, the amount of land that actually is being saved now in the sea, the 3 to 15%, it's not nearly enough. At the moment, I think only about $50 billion is being spent, to help conservation programs, when scientists are saying that about 300 to 400 billion is needed. So clearly we're not injecting the resources, and speaking again, of course I'm going to go back to the bears, but we're talking about keystone species. We're talking about animals that fertilize the land. We're talking about animals that till the land, fertilize the forest, animals that are umbrella species so that they keep the forest clean by eating carrion and dead animals and save us from being sick from the bacteria. They're an indicator species, so a healthy bear will show you that there's healthy rivers and there's healthy forest out there, but again we're not doing enough to protect them. And when you extrapolate that from bears, why aren't we giving that same respect to a multitude of other species that we obviously don't respect, but we're exploiting so badly that we're going to see their demise within years?
Yeah. So I want to piggyback off of your comment and turn to you, Tom, about this financing issue. So $52 billion is put to work for conservation efforts every year, mostly philanthropy and public money, but we really need 300 to 400 billion a year. So how do
I'm glad you clarified that, because it's really important that you understand that 50 to 52 is an annual number, so there is lots of government support, but it's 1/6 to 1/8 of the real need per annum. So a couple things that I think are worth mentioning. One is we have on this panel a lot of people who are interested and deeply interested in preserving our planet and our natural environments, and at the same time providing livelihoods for the people who depend on nature. I'd like to use one example, and the Nature Conservancy in 2010 created impact investing. Nature Conservancy, I believe, is one of the foremost conservancy groups globally. It's certainly a global organization. And in 2014, we launched a group called NatureVest, which is our impact investing arm. And in 2015, we did something pretty dramatic, which was done over the course of literally multilateral negotiations with a myriad of countries, including the Seychelles, the United Kingdom, Belgium, France, and others, including the UN, various banks, and debtors. And we refinanced through an impact investment the debt of the Seychelles. The Seychelles are about 1,500 miles off of the East African coast and about 1,000 miles off of India. And if anybody's been there, it's a breathtakingly, stunningly beautiful set of islands. Now I want you to think of that country is 99% water. 99% water. And 43% of their economy is totally dependent on fisheries, tourism, snorkeling, diving. And it's one of the largest habitats, if not the largest globally, for nesting green turtles. It has 1,000 species. It's magnificent. If you like the bonefish, which I do, it's pretty extraordinary. That said, what this Debt for Nature program has done is actually now, through a marine spatial plan, worked out through the government agencies I mentioned, the NGOs, as well as the Nature Conservancy, and lots of scientists, which took, as you might imagine, quite a long time, a program where every dollar of repayment of debt is now funding, protecting that marine spatial plan, which protects 43% of the Seychelles economy. So the fishermen are happy, the tourist industry captains are happy, and certainly for those who visit the Seychelles or live on the 100,000 people, they're happy. Those types of programs are now possible. And that's through creative financing, and it's scaled. So now I want you to think about a country the size of Germany. Think of Germany. That's the Seychelles now protected marine area, which is roughly went from 0.04% protected to 30%. We need to have that kind of impact. We cannot not do those things. But we need to do that collaboratively, and it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. And if we do it individually or try and do it one group at a time or one NGO at a time, it will not work. We can't get the scale.
Yeah. So, Paul, I wanted to ask you to jump in now. Let's talk a little bit about how do we need to diversify the minds that are thinking about this? I mean, at Conservation X Labs, you're trying to bring new kinds of problem solvers to the table. Why is that important, and how are you doing it?
I love that question, and to answer it, I actually want to build off of something Tom just said, because I think it's a really great example about getting to scale. There's this sort of financial scale, but also the scale of our impact. And if we a very similar example is Kiribati, which is a low-lying set of atolls, a country in the South Pacific, and put all of their waters in a marine protected area. But they have which is, I forget the size of it, but it's similarly huge, but it's also fantastic tuna fishing ground. And they have a grand total of 3 boats to patrol an area that is, I think, larger. I think it's like something like the size of Texas or something like this, or it's a massive space. So people illegally fish their waters all the time. One great way to overcome this is to borrow from other fields where scale is possible, i.e. technology. And in fact, one of my favorite examples of this is there's a program called Global Fishing Watch, which was put together by an organization called SkyTruth, which uses satellite imagery and the like, and Google and Oceana, and a marine nonprofit. And they were actually able to, what they do is every vessel in the world is supposed to, they don't always do this, but they're supposed to have a transponder that satellites can track. And if you go on to Global Fishing Watch on the website, you can actually see in real time where all the boats in the world are moving around. And they actually use this with, Google applied some back-end AI and machine learning to understand what the patterns that these ships were doing were like. And it turns out there's a very distinctive pattern if you're fishing for tuna with a long line fishing. You do this very, very deliberate thing. And they, using that tool, were able to effectively prosecute the owners of this vessel, which were out of Hong Kong, I believe, for illegally fishing in these waters. And the fine levied was greater than the entire annual budget of Kiribati, right? So the great thing about this was you don't need to scale up. Clearly, the money is helpful, but you need to scale up the access to this as well. And there's an opportunity using things like satellites, ultimately, to accomplish these. And that is sort of a way to answer your question. Solutions are not hard to come by necessarily, but they're often siloed off in other industries or other fields. And how can we bring those in so that we've got new ideas and new thinkers that are building out these programs, so that a solution is a technology that might be built on artificial intelligence software, for example, but it's also financed in a novel way that's brought in some really interesting either debt financing or something else that is not necessarily the purview of the conservationist, him or herself. And then build those into enterprises that grow with appropriate legal protection and effective governance, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the things that we've built Conservation X Labs on, which is, as my co-founder, Alex Dagan, likes to say, the problem with conservation is that it's filled with conservationists, which I think is meant to be pejorative. I always feel a little bad because I'm a conservationist, but when you look at it that way, conservationists like me are really trained to study the world, which means what we're doing is measuring the demise of nature, which is kind of meaningless. But then we get people like Tom and Jill and Laura who are not trained as, haven't spent too much time in a lab like I have, or out in the field doing basic survey work. That's where solutions are coming from, right? The sort of work that you all are doing is not just, okay, how do I measure that more species have gone extinct? But rather, how can I turn that around, either by rewilding appropriately and then investing using new models in protected areas and financing things. How do we start to bring new technologies into this? So speaking of, Jill, you mentioned the chimpanzee work. We've built what we call a digital makerspace, and I encourage anyone who wants to go to it. Conservationx.com it's a space where you can go, a mass collaboration platform. An idea can be generated and then supported into developing a real product. And just a few weeks ago, a woman will be announcing it broadly next month and opening this up. But a few weeks ago, a woman found her way to the site and had just an idea to use facial recognition technology and bots that are surfing around social media sites to track illegally traded chimpanzees. Called it Chimp Face, which I think is great. Didn't know anything about how to build this, but very quickly One of the leading facial recognition labs at Michigan State University came in, right? So they're not interested necessarily in conservation outside of a passion for it, but they know how to build this kind of technology. We've got some folks that are building social media bots that are able to survey these, right, and autonomously go out there. And they can even track, because facial recognition, this is what Facebook is doing to us all day, right? They can even track that individual chimpanzees now through their lifespan as they age, right? Because even infants will be traded, and then they'll later be traded up on this. The Jane Goodall Institute has now been interested and supportive. That's just an example of how we can bring other people that might not know about the biology of the rhino to thinking about how we might create a new solution that addresses these issues. And that's what I think, for us, scale is all about. It's not just about the impact we have globally, but scaling up the people that are involved in this, so that everyone's bringing their best piece of expertise and their best passion forward to the problem.
Yeah, that's great. Tom, any thoughts to add, having spent time in the technology space and thinking about scale?
So a few years ago, I was invited to participate in a conference like this through Paul Allen's group, and one of the things I learned on that trip was that 95% of the long-line fishing boats in the South Asia-Pac region, if you will, which is an amazing, the Great Barrier Reef, but then you have Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia, and it's probably the most important ecological marine system in the world. And when you have 95% of the boats that are not essentially being monitored, they are not necessarily all playing ethically. And so one of the ideas was exactly how can we use satellite technology, transponders, and Google Maps, if you will, to actually help police. And I think that highlights that innovation can happen anywhere. And I'm a big believer in, and I know Paul is as well, that there are more smart people outside the room than inside the room, and competition is a way of pulling people inside the room from essentially a different set of prisms through which they're looking at the world, or our world as. And that's a really important construct. And I think it leads to the potential of collaboration, and I think the example he just used is pretty amazing, actually.
Great. So I'm going to ask each of you, what we've already started to get into some of the great technologies and solutions here. So what gives each of you hope about the future that we're going to be able to solve this problem? And then we're going to go to the audience for some questions. So how about we start with Laura and Jill, and then we'll do Tom and Paul.
Ladies first.
Ladies first.
I just, want to go back to something that my dad started in 1990, which was a cartoon that was called Captain Planet, and it was seen by millennials in 100 countries, and well, they're now millennials, but they were much younger then, in 100 countries in 23 different languages. And I recently, and it was to edutain kids and teach them about issues of global importance, not just around the environment, but social issues too, landmines, war, AIDS, things like that. And I recently saw Chris Helmsworth, and he's a planeteer. He's from down under, and he watched the cartoon, and he sang the theme song, which some of the people in here could probably sing, but I'm not even going to attempt it. Ian Somerhalder, my son, John R., who's the sustainability director at 25 years old for the city of Atlanta, he watched the cartoon when he was like 5. And, it really, educated him and set him on this course. And so many youth around the world, and that really gives me a lot of hope. He set up a foundation 25 years ago, which Captain Planet Foundation, which funds educators to teach kids about the environment, and now you call it three-dimensional science or STEM learning or place-based learning, but they're actually solving for real environmental problems in their schoolyards and communities and getting over their fear of nature, because so many kids now are just terrified, especially in urban centers, and it's really important. And then there are a couple of other things. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about Sustainable Development Goals, how important they are, alleviate poverty and improve health outcomes, and affordable clean energy for all, empowering women and girls, and that's so important. But we can do all that with saving our oceans and our forests and the species that share the planet with us. And I just wanted to also mention, this is a great resource. It's a business plan called Drawdown, and the editor is Paul Hawken. The writer was Kathleen Wilkinson, and it's based on research from 100 different researchers in 22 different countries. And it's the top 100 solutions for climate change. It is a business plan. So number 3 and 4, and Mike Milken hands this book out, and he talked about it so much when he hosted us for his conservation conference, his first. And he's really into food, if you haven't noticed. I mean, it's been a vegan menu the whole time. But 3 and 4 have to do with food. So number 3 is dealing with food waste. A third of our food that's grown doesn't even make it to the plate. And number 4 is eating a more plant-rich diet, which obviously is better for our kids, their brain function, their development, you know, our health, heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, all of this. And it's better for the planet. And using regenerative agriculture draws down the carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it back into the ground, because we all know carbon is the backbone of all life. And then number 6 and 7 are another couple of my favorites that are absolutely necessary. But educating girls and empower, family planning. So we've got to stop, you know, the population bomb at some point, because and there's a lot of talk about going to Mars and, you know, and going to outer space, and you know, and it's very costly, and we want to be inspiring young people to be thinking, and we've got Buzz Aldrin here, right? Stand up, take a bow.
Wow.
Now that man is a total badass. But I'm just saying it's great, but if we're going to spend all...
Leadership in the world, cooperation with China.
Cooperation with
And
China.
Mars. Yeah.
And Mars, okay. But I'm just saying, if we're going to focus on going to space, you know, we'll never turn Mars into planet Earth. You know, it's just not going to happen. So we need to take care of Earth and forget so much about life on Mars.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Laura's got a lot of hope, as you can tell. So let's talk about Jill.
Just
what
echoing
gives you
Laura
hope?
again, forgive me, but your plant-based diet, you know, even the United Nations said in 2010, we have to shift towards a plant-based diet to mitigate the problems of climate change and hunger in this world. So to me, that seems a no-brainer, first of all. But I have a lot of hope, especially working in China, where I've been there for about 33 years. And when I first went there, there was one animal welfare group, and now there's over 200. People are just surging through in a massive, great movement of conservation, animal welfare, wanting to help species in their country. And the one way that we can do this together is in areas of demand reduction, for example. So with the use of endangered species in traditional Chinese medicine, work holistically with the community groups, with the Chinese medicine groups, not just only in China, but across the world. Here in the United States, we work with the American Association of TCM, for example, who stand up and say, don't use us as an excuse to use bear bile because we don't need it. You know, examples like that, where we have these groups on board and willing to promote the herbal and the synthetic alternatives. And of course, the other thing is just to help the bears or species where they are in the forest as well. So work on human conflict mitigation as well. And, you know, just working again from the inside out to help protect communities, help to protect the animals at the same time.
Great. Tom, what gives you hope?
3 or 4 things. One, and I'll piggyback on the comments that have been made. One is that family planning. I was recently reading a book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling, who sadly died earlier this year. In Factfulness, he has many charts. He's quantitatively oriented. And one of the charts was a chart on births. The average birth mother in the United States in 1800 birthed 7.6 or so children. Same in Iran. Interesting. Our chart over the course of through 2017 more or less steadily declined to the southeast corner of the grid. Iran's is almost a straight line across until about 2000, best I can tell because not by year, about 2005 or so, and it drops literally to 1.6, which is lower than the United States, 1.9. And what was all that all about? Educating women. it ended up being the best family planning exercise because all of a sudden women felt empowered. So we don't quite know where we're going to have an unintended effect, but that's a huge impact in terms of just planning a family and giving women real choice and rights. Second is the millennials of today get slaughtered by essentially baby boomers like me oftentimes. Managing them is different because we're not accepting them for where they are as opposed to where we want them to be. On the other hand, they really do care about purpose, and one of their purpose drivers is sustainability. And I think if you read any of the data or the studies that are out, 1 in 4 millennials in 2016 was going to change jobs within 12 months. 43% were going to change jobs in 3 years, and in 4 years it was almost 3 out of 4. Why? Because we didn't care about their personal growth and development, and/or we didn't have an organization that had purpose. Why does that give me hope? Because a guy like Larry Fink, who's on the board of the Nature Conservancy globally with me and a bunch of others, wrote a shareholder letter earlier this year, and he said it is the responsibility of companies globally, not just locally in the U.S., to be socially responsible because governments can't any longer tackle these wicked problems by themselves. And we're not trustful that that's going to happen. And he manages $5.7 trillion. So if you think that may have had an influence, I can guarantee you he took a lot of heat. That was a very courageous decision. So the fact that he's now talking about social responsibilities, and not just as a greenwashing of sorts, but in a meaningful way where he's going to invest his monies, which are a lot of monies, for those companies that have sustainability objectives that are real, hard, data-driven. And I think those things give me great hope.
Great. Paul.
Everything they all said.
Ditto.
Can I
And more.
I want to hammer home a point that I think all three of you just made, which is that literally the solutions to the climate crisis or the sixth mass extinction are good on their own merits, right? Like educating girls also reduces corruption, increases economic productivity. I mean, it's all good stuff you would do anyway, in addition to the fact that it reduces birth rates and empowers women. And by the way, they tend to invest in more sustainable alternatives. In fact, one of the reasons I love that, one of the reasons I love that so much is because I have 3 daughters, and I think they're amazing, and my wife is 100 times smarter than I am. But let me tell a story that illustrates why I have hope, culturally, socially. When my wife got pregnant with our first daughter, who just turned 13 yesterday, I'm now the proud father of a teenager, which I think is insane. She got on a message board on Baby Center, which later migrated to Facebook, of other women that were giving birth the same month, in April of 2005. And it was a cross-section as a result. The vast majority were evangelical conservatives from various parts of the United States, all doing various sundry things, but they became a friend. And there was one point a few years ago where, and because Al Gore is speaking tonight, I'll mention his name, somebody posted on there, a little chain, I friggin' hate Al Gore and those self-righteous environmental greenies always telling me what to do. And they started piling on, yeah, they're always saying, you gotta eat less meat, and you gotta, climate change is real, and we know it's not, and that, it was exactly what you might imagine it to be. Until one woman, my wife's just watching this kind of going, all right. And one woman says, yes, but I do try to buy organic food for my kids, and I don't like to use those nasty chemicals. And then another mom, yeah, and we make sure that we recycle everything we possibly can. Oh yeah, and we just bought ourselves a hybrid car because it's saving us money, and
they love those wind farms.
And they love those wind farms. Yeah, actually,
it makes ranchers money.
The woman who started the chain actually is in Kansas, so interesting. But it flipped entirely into this. These are my sustainability bona fides conversation, and the women, probably because they're women, were starting to find common ground. The liberals and conservatives on there talking about what they cared about, i.e. their kids. What that illustrates for me is that we all want the same things. We all want a healthy planet. We all want thriving communities. We all want empowered new young people around the world. It's a matter of aligning the incentives correctly to do so. And I know it's possible to solve these issues. If you take the exponential growth curve in solar, for example, literally 2 years ago, oil companies still didn't think that this would be a problem. Today we have even petrostates looking at the end of oil within the next couple of decades because of the economics of renewables like wind and solar. China just installed, I think it's 40 gigawatts of solar electricity. That's 40 nuclear power plants. That's that's incredible. Like the scale that this is growing. Is that right?
They're going to build 80. We only have 103 or 5 in our country, and their plants will each be significantly more productive than ours. And it's a clean form of energy.
And it's a clean form of energy,
and
they know it's good for their economy. I mean, they China recognizes this is a way to compete globally, and they're right, candidly. So what that means is exponential growth curves in technology, right? Here's the last piece of why this is the bringing new minds and new people into this, is by 2020, 2/3 of the world will have access to the internet. That's like 5 billion people that will have more access to more knowledge in their pockets than President Clinton did, period. How do we get all of that harnessed? That means and that's because of technology and then things like Moore's law, right? The sort of scalable exponential growth curve of those technologies. It's happened now with another silicon-based product in solar, and we're seeing that more and more and more. And I think what Tom was describing about the sort of way that the powers that be in finance and government are thinking, they want the right things too, just like all of the women on my wife's baby center board, all want to do the right thing and are going to deploy capital in that way. The technology solutions are there. We know we can do those. The people desire to do this, right? We have mechanisms to do it. We can engage people, innovators around the world using all kinds of open innovation techniques. And now that we have sort of the power brokers saying, I've got to do this, I've got to deploy my money the right way too, I've got to govern my country the right way too. That's like a trifecta. I mean, that's why I have hope. It's not going to happen overnight. But I know it's something that we can do. I know it makes the world we all want not just possible, but likely.
Yep. Great. So, woohoo! Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a couple of quick questions. Why don't we do we have questions? Hands up. Okay, we've got one back here.
Thank you. Thanks for this panel. A couple of years ago, I saw a really good panel here on conservation of species. There's a group I saw they call African Parks Network, which actually takes over running of parks in Africa to rebuild ecosystems. The question I have for you on this topic is, how do you make people care? I mean, people in this room care, but if you go to any city in North America, any place in the world, you tell them to talk about saving elephants or tigers and stuff like that. They're like, that's just so far removed from me, and I've never been on a safari, I've never seen these things, it doesn't make a difference to me. And they're barely making ends meet. So how do you make them care?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great question. Can I just follow up on that? One of the famous behavioral economists, Dan Ariely from Duke, said, if you wanted to create a problem that people won't care about, it's global warming. Greenhouse gases are invisible. You can't track your own contribution to the problem, and you think it's going to happen to someone else. So I think it's an excellent question. Who wants to take it? Laura, do you want to take it?
So I think there are a couple of ways, but at the Captain Planet Foundation, what we're doing is we're doing school gardens, which I know sounds very elementary, but getting kids out to grow their own food is so incredibly empowering. They get over their fear of dirt, germs, and bugs, and eating vegetables, and it informs lifelong habits, healthy eating habits. And then we also have a program called Project Hero, which is an online platform that sucks up federal and state endangered and threatened species data, and it's accessible to any educator on pollinators. And what happens is that kids can know what is threatened and endangered right in their schoolyards and their communities, and then they can go when they're studying endangered species, which usually ends up ripping their hearts out of their chests, and they have to go on and discover what apathy is all about, because empathy is shut down because they can't do anything about polar bears and elephants and rhinos and penguins someplace else, but they sure as hell can help bees and butterflies, beetles, birds, bats right there in their schoolyard, or any species really, once the platform is set up. So once you educate kids, they go and educate their parents and grandparents, just like when they say, don't smoke cigarettes, it will kill you, wear your seatbelt. My kids did it for me. Not the smoking part. My husband did that for me. But I'm just saying that once a kid does a project and does restoration or plants a garden or plants trees, the adults aren't going to come and tear it apart. They're not going to wreck it. So I think that you've got to start there. Plus, ecotourism is huge. Tourism in and of its own self contributes 10% of GDP globally. And it's on the rise. 2017 was the UN declared year of sustainable tourism. So it's the evolution of ecotourism to sustainable tourism, which means you have to include the communities. And it can't be just about animals, but it has to be educating the communities that those animals are actually worth more alive than dead. And I think that it's growing. National Geographic, Virtuoso. There's so many ways around the globe that they're onboarding the sustainable tourism, and I would say everybody here probably agrees with that. And then in China, they went and polled the Chinese about their use and desire for ivory, and like 83% of the people polled had no idea that the tusks came from living animals. They thought that they were shed naturally, and they said, we would not, if we knew that the animal had to be killed, we would not buy it. But Vietnam, even though it's reduced greatly in China, Vietnam and Laos and other countries are, so they need the same kind of educational programs in these other countries. So
Okay,
I went on.
All right.
May I add to that?
Yeah.
First of all, Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, also has a community gardens in schools program. I think they went from 100 schools in Chicago, and now they're in 5 different cities with other multiples of that number. And it's all about STEM technology and teaching kids the care. In terms of ecotourism, I want to tie that to the bubble in which we're sitting in the moment. We all care dearly. You wouldn't be in this room if you didn't care dearly about our planet. There's frankly very few of us, and in the United States the estimate is that only 7% of the people in the United States have used a passport. So ecotourism, unless it's happening locally, is not happening.
Well, we're doing local.
Hold it.
A shameless plug.
The technological opportunity, however, is augmented reality, virtual reality. You can do ecotourism and never leave a classroom. Just imagine what that impact would be. That's awareness creating. And we need the population writ large, to your point, to actually have the awareness, and the way to do that is to combine the physical with the virtual in an augmented way, because that's how it will really change.
Bravo.
Just a quick plug for a friend created something called iNaturalist. If you guys haven't downloaded this app in terms of awareness, it's an app. You take a picture of anything that's out there, and it'll tell you there's computer vision on the back end that tells you what species that is. And it's so cool. Like you said, like people just want to explore. My kids love this thing, right?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
What's that snake? What's that? You know, and turns out they love them as a result. What's this insect?
We need Spielberg to create the environmental equivalent of Ready Player One. That's what we need.
So we're getting close to our time.
Sorry.
So this is fantastic. I wish we had another hour to go on, but I do want the panelists to be able to share with us in a lightning round. You know, what are the things that we can do when we walk out of the room if we're not already doing them? I think Jane Goodall said 200 years from now, future generations are going to look back at this moment in time and say, how did everyone let this happen? So this is our time, our moment in history to do something about it. So what are those actions that we all can do when we're out the door after this panel?
Well, we're really lucky at Animals Asia because we have our clients are the bears in China and Vietnam, so we can have community-based programs where the public from all over the world can come and be a volunteer. You can be a bear worker for a week, and this is especially important, of course, for people in China, where they come and have summer camps. They learn about the bears, they learn about traditional medicine and how bear bile is unnecessary, etc., etc. And it's just, again, it's a beautiful holistic program to bring in the public. I would say again, watch something like Earthlings, watch the film Earthlings. It's a very compelling, a very difficult film to watch over an hour and a half, but my goodness, it gives some solutions at the end of the day to how we should be leading our lives, not how our lives are currently being led. And the other one is A Plastic Ocean. These are both produced by friends of mine, actually. Plastic Ocean shows that 8 million tons of plastic is being injected into the sea every single year. And in terms of even when you go into Starbucks with those ridiculous little stirrers that you use for 2 seconds, please don't use them, because they are going to last for the lifespan of your children, your great-grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, and probably another cycle after that. And for me, last but not least, and please forgive me because I'm not given to profanities very often, but what we want to make the point is that bears and other species must be allowed to do what comes naturally to them in their forest of their birth. So I'd like to give all the panel a cheeky little t-shirt that we've got that is going viral in China. The guys are loving it in China. It is cheeky, but it says exactly what we should be looking to. And it's an exclamation mark. It's not the... So there's one for all of you guys on the panel.
Thank you, Jill.
And
Thank you, Jill.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, what should we do?
I would encourage people to watch the films that Jill just mentioned, and there's another one that is it out now? Eating Animals.
Not quite yet.
It's you can't watch that film and have the same diet after you watch it. I think the plastic point is well founded. Use Brita. Use something other than a plastic bottle when you feed your guests water. It's hideous, is what it is. And thirdly, I would look for ways to essentially impress your children with, when you used to tell them buckle up or wear your seatbelt, have something that they can do easily, because that little thing will have a butterfly effect throughout their lives and their children's lives that would be environmentally a more sustainable behavior than the current behavior you're trying to get them to change.
Laura.
So I just have to say, Jane Goodall, and I use this saying, a Native American saying, we do not inherit the world from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And she goes on to say every time she speaks, no, we are stealing their future away. And I think we have to hold our elected officials accountable. We have to vote about clean water and clean air and healthy soil and healthy food for the sake of our children, because it is their inheritance. And what is happening at the EPA with Scott Pruitt, undoing all the work that we've done for so long, and our foundation is having to spend a lot of money in defense, with NRDC and Defenders of Wildlife to protect those species in this country, and rollbacks, with our public lands, and they want to sell them off to the highest bidder. And anyway, I think it's really important that millennials vote, for the millennials in the room or younger, and that we hold them accountable. And I'm really proud of what hundreds of thousands of youth are doing on gun regulations. The AK-47s, the assault weapons that are made to kill many people in a very short amount of time need to be banned. And it should be gardens, not guns, and gardens, and if Ted were here, not nuclear bombs. So, and we are in an arms race now with Russia, if you haven't noticed. And if there's a small scale exchange of nuclear weapons or an accident, the risk is high, then 2 billion people will die of a nuclear famine because the bombs are 30 to 90 more times more powerful than the A bombs that from Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
We want to end on hope, Laura.
But no, I'm just saying that these things are really important, and that this country is spending $1 trillion on, rearming and building more nuclear weapons is absolutely ludicrous. And the Pope has already come out and said it is totally immoral. And all the work that we're doing in this room collectively is going to be for absolutely nothing if we don't get that situation rectified. So,
right. Paul.
No, I think you've heard, there's so many things that individuals can do. It comes down to me as an individual. It sounds dumb, but do the right thing, because it's probably good for you and the planet, right? Drive less, because the more you drive, the fewer social connections you have. Eat less meat, because it's healthier for you, and you save some money, right? A host of things that aren't hard that we can all do. But I think I want to see some scale, and so what I was going to suggest is invest your money right. put your money in good things. Guess what? Rolling back regulations and emphasizing industries from last century is not a winning economic strategy. Clean tech is a winning economic strategy. Put your money there. Get it. Put your money into conservation technology. There's almost none to date. We mentioned some really cool efforts, and invest in some of the enterprises that themselves are doing this work, right? Help them grow up so that if you've got drones surveying elephants in Africa, there's also a business you've invested in to repair the darn drones so that they can keep working, and there's some local jobs created, right? Not only is there a return on investment associated with these things, but it's actually doing the kind of thing we need. The opportunity for making money and doing well right now is huge, and I would encourage everybody, even with a small amount.
All right, so we're
we're
getting pushed out. So we're wrapping up. So thank you so much, Laura. Do you want to do a wolf call?
Oh yeah, let's do it. Okay,
Wolf call?
so 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Thank you so much.